Hey man, here's a venti caramel macchiato. You can have it. Thanks. Let's assume for a moment that you love gourmet coffee, and someone offered you a free cup of your favorite beverage. You would probably take it, right? You might ask what's wrong with it first. You might go so far out of polite courtesy to ask, "Are you sure?" or "I don't owe you anything?" It all seems legit. After all, you are in a coffee shop. The workers are all wearing the same uniform. The bell on the door jingles when customers enter and exit the building. The cash register beeps to let you know that your card has been accepted. You think to yourself, "Cool, free coffee," and you thank the staff and you are on your way. Let's change the scenario slightly. Let us now assume your best friend Bob works for said coffee shop, and every time you come in the door he gives you one on the house. You would still take the free coffee. It could be okay. Bob could be the owner, and this could be his small business. Bob is generous enough to share his product with his close friends, nothing wrong with that. But what if this isn't Bob's coffee shop? This is a national franchise, and Bob just works the counter. Do you still accept the coffee? Many folks may still accept it. Who hasn't hooked up a friend with some free eats at some point? Okay, now let's go a step further and you tell me if the free coffee is still as appealing. Take Bob out of the store altogether and let's put him at a roadside stand, and now he's handing out free coffee to anyone who stops by. Wow, Bob is an awesome guy. So generous. How's that coffee tasting? It all looks okay. The cups all bear the same familiar logo. There is an oddly retro-looking coffee grinder sitting on the counter. The only thing that you notice is that Bob is not wearing an apron nor a name tag. After a chat with Bob, he reveals to you that he has a group of friends who work at the local gourmet coffee franchise. They keep Bob stocked with cups and coffee beans. Free coffee, anyone? It might still be okay, right? Maybe this is how they get rid of old cups and coffee beans. Out-of-date food product goes in the trash, by the way. And I don't think cups have a shelf life, but, whatever you have to tell yourself. It's not like he's charging for it. Oh, wait, now Bob's charging for coffee. A month later, you find out that Bob is now putting his own logo on the cups and brewing his own Joe, which, at least, looks a lot like the stuff that you used to get at the local coffee shop. I say used to get because that store closed a week ago. The point of this reductio ad absurdum is to expose the fact that at some point in the spectrum between an innocuous free cup of coffee and a wholesale counterfeit operation, a crime was committed. Where do you think the line was crossed? Most people would say things got a little sketchy when we moved Bob out of the coffee shop. Is that because we were talking about handing out a physical product? What if Bob was peddling something else? What if Bob was handing out digital copies of books, or music, or movies? Let's take a look at the parallels between the coffee shop and online piracy. I chose to use the coffee shop for this analogy for a reason, and we'll get back to that a little later. Our best friend Bob, who gives us a free cup of coffee every time we walk through the door, is now giving us a free MP3 file as well. No problem. It's just the latest song that he and his band recorded in his mother's basement. No, wait. It's the latest Bieber track. One step further and we see Bob running a file sharing site. This time folks are not supplying cups and coffee beans. Now it's ebooks and digital movies. Wait, hold on. Now Bob wants me to pay for a subscription to his file sharing service. Finally, we see Bob selling bootleg and counterfeit Blu-rays. Have fun in prison, Bob. I would venture to say, at least in the United States, we do not see a lot of counterfeit goods for sale. Online, certainly, but not from roadside stands like in India, China, or the Middle East. Nonetheless, hardly anyone would openly admit to taking Bob's hot coffee, hot referring to both the temperature and the fact that it was stolen. But yet 57 million Americans are illegally downloading music, potentially more when you consider all forms of digital media. So how did we as a society move from the days of gangsters and counterfeiting to a free love attitude toward digital media? Well, let's begin with counterfeiting. While most people think of money as being associated with counterfeiting, a counterfeit is actually a copy of a product which is intended to look like the real thing. Being counterfeit does not make any assumptions as to the quality of the product. It is merely to say that the product was not built by a licensed manufacturer. In fact, on the topic of computer hardware used by public utility companies, Mark Tannenbaum, a senior project manager for the Electric Power Research Institute, states that there is no foolproof way to detect non-genuine items. Counterfeiting is probably the oldest form of piracy in terms of infringement upon intellectual property, and was quickly addressed as a crime in the United States. The founding fathers of the United States strongly insisted that intellectual property should be protected and ensured that the framers of the Constitution granted Congress, under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, the power to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for a limited time exclusive rights to inventors and authors to their works. On the other hand, China has long been accused of lax policy regarding the protection of intellectual property. Many critics assert that the Chinese government is essentially placating the West by insisting that they are cracking down on intellectual property rights violations, while in fact the government is executing a long-term strategic plan to catch up to the United States and Europe on the technology front. As I mentioned before, from the beginnings of American government, we have vowed to protect intellectual property through the use of copyright, patent, and trademark. Yet that all changed in June of 1999 when Napster released its peer-to-peer music sharing software. By the time Napster was ordered to shut down in 2001, many consumers had clearly thrown off any notions that intellectual property was something that could be stolen and embraced the idea that sharing was not only okay, but argued that they were helping, in this case the music industry, by serving as a new model for distribution and providing increased revenue through mass exposure. Just like helping out with getting rid of old cups and coffee beans. Whatever you need to tell yourself, Bob. Napster and the advent of the MP3 file format gave rise to larger file sharing services connected through a central server or using BitTorrent protocols to share files and data, many of which are located outside the United States, making recourse difficult for U.S. intellectual property owners. The Swedish-based website, the Pirate Bay, is likely one of the most prolific examples. According to Alexa.com, a global web ranking resource, the Pirate Bay is the 227th most popular website in the world. The pervasive nature of this technology has served to reinforce the idea that online piracy is not a big deal. In her article in Business Education Digest, Dr. Heidi Perrault cites a study wherein 89% of 285 high school students admit to downloading files illegally and feel that their actions are of little consequence. Of note, the same students are retreating into the shadows and operating on darknets to avoid notice, yet continue to state that they are not concerned about copyright infringement, nor do they consider illegal file sharing as stealing. What does the future hold as this shift in behavior plays out? One can really only speculate, but taking a look around might shed some light. According to Forbes, a small indie film distributor, Wolf Video, has lost 50% of its profits over the last year due to piracy and anti-piracy measures. TV and film salaries are lower, and certain segments of the workforce have been lost, and lower production value projects have been scrapped. To illustrate this, let's look at the pop culture hit Game of Thrones. Piracy aside, the revenue is still quite large for this program. Lesser-known films and TV shows, while loved by the fans, perhaps loved too much by the fans wherein they are downloaded and not paid for, the production companies may see as not being commercially viable. What this means for consumers is a smaller selection of well-financed productions designed for the masses. Artists and creators may find it more difficult to reach a commercial tipping point. Because their earnings have been cut by the impact of piracy, they may be viewed by the production company as lower-value projects and are then scrapped. So how does this relate back to the cup of coffee? There's been a long-standing argument among writers in particular that you wouldn't steal a cup of coffee. Why steal an ebook? The price is about the same. You may sip your coffee for 20 minutes, but get 5 to 6 hours of enjoyment from a book. The barista can make your coffee in under a minute. It may take a year or more for the book to go from the author's mind to the bookstore shelf. Have you noticed that there are fewer bookstores lately, but there are more and more coffee shops?